Hello, my name is Scott Brackett. I'm a musician and a synth nerd, and I'd like to welcome you to part one of the Retro Synth video program. It's going to be a three-part series in which I'm going to explore some of the gems from recent electronic music history and also talk about how they fit into a modern context. Yamaha Synth USA was kind enough to send me a few of their very well-preserved machines for this video series, the Yamaha C1 music computer and the Yamaha CX5M Mk1 and Mk2. Through the course of this series, I'll be talking about my experiences getting these guys up and running, what it's like to use them to create, and how they might still be relevant or useful to a modern setup. I always learn something valuable about sound design when I spend some time studying the generation of technology that came before what I'm using now, whether that's recording technology or performing technology, and inspecting my art through the lens of a designer from a previous era really ends up yielding something interesting. So, without further delay, let's go do some stuff. The Retro Synth video program is sponsored by Yamaha synthesizers. Nobody wants to be forgotten. We all want to believe that the things which are important to us will also be remembered and appreciated by future generations. In some ways, this is getting easier and easier with things like software emulation and the ever-expanding libraries of streaming digital media. But what about those things that are hard to capture in a software emulation, like the music computers of yesteryear, for example? The smell of the plastic case as it warms up, the snap of the spring that ejects a floppy disk, and all the gentle chirps and buzzes of machines that actually have moving parts inside of them. The overall visceral experience of using these original machines is hard to capture in a software emulation. There are also really interesting design properties to some of these old machines. Now, all that said, it's not really practical for most people to locate and maintain these glorious old machines because it takes kind of a lot of work and a little bit of an investment. But I think it's important to keep in mind the trade-offs that we make as we transition from technology to technology. The Yamaha CX5M is an MSX-compatible computer that expands upon normal features expected from these systems. It has a built-in 8-voice FM synthesizer module. For those of you who don't know already, MSX was a standard of computer architecture that didn't gain as much traction in the US, but it's similar to the concept of the IBM PC standard. Basically, a standard agreed upon by manufacturers so that peripherals and software will work with computers made by different companies. The CX5M Mk1 was introduced in 1984, and soon after, a Mk2 was released. The stock Mk1 uses the SFG01 sound module, which can only be played using a special proprietary keyboard or from notes written into the CX5M software. It requires that you buy or make a 5-pin DIN to RCA adapter in modern times so that you can connect it to a composite television. You can program its sounds and compose using the voice editor and FM Music Composer cartridges. The CX5M Mk2 uses the SFG05 sound module, which can be played via external MIDI and doesn't require the proprietary keyboard. So it's generally the better choice for a modern collector. The Mk2 also has RCA output on it, which makes it easier to connect it to modern TV and video capture devices. A word of warning though, not all TVs with composite inputs are made equally. And in modern displays, if you connect a CX5M, Mk1 or 2 to a monitor and the signal is flickering, get yourself down to the Goodwill and try a different monitor or TV before looking into any repairs. Because it could just be that that monitor doesn't interpret the signals correctly. Both Mk1 and Mk2 also had cartridges that would allow you to program the DX7 more easily, and you could also just play video games or use office productivity software on it. Overall, the CX5M is a really cool sounding multi-timbral synthesizer, and interacting with it in the form of an MSX computer is really fun. However, if you're just interested in the sounds it makes, and you find that the computer part of it is kind of a pain, I'd recommend you check out the FB01 synth module, because it's essentially the same sound module in these computers, just in a standalone format. Next up, we have the Yamaha C1 music computer. The Yamaha C1 was released in 1987, and it is essentially just a 286 PC with 8 built-in MIDI ports and a built-in display. It looks like a laptop-ish, but it doesn't have a battery. However, it does have this super cool travel case. It doesn't make any sound on its own, but rather it's meant to be used to sequence external hardware synthesizers. At the time, plugins were not a thing, so it was pretty remarkable to have a machine that was purpose-built for composing in MIDI, with very powerful editing capabilities, and could run your sequencing software of choice, all in a form factor that didn't require you to purchase or lug around a MIDI patch bay or a monitor in order to control multiple sound sources. So that's my overview of the Yamaha C1 and CX5M. In the next part of the series, I'll show you what it took to get them up and running and what it's like to actually use them to make some music.
So lastly, I'll just say thank you to the folks at Yamaha for trusting me to handle these glorious machines. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this series, and I look forward to doing the next 2 with you. So if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and put them down below. And if you liked and want to subscribe, go ahead and like and subscribe. See you next time.